Okay. I would like to call to order the special board meeting for Community Union School District 303 on Monday, August 21st, 2023 at 5:20 p.m. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll?
Yes, Mrs. Bell is absent today. Mr. Kuchert?
Here.
Mr. Lackner?
Here.
Mr. Lentz?
Here.
Mrs. McCabe?
Here.
Mr. McNally?
Here.
Mrs. Fairgrave?
Here, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and my understanding is we do not have any citizen comments at this time. So we will move on to item number 3 on the agenda for action. Can I have a motion to approve the District 303 personnel report?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. McNally. Can I have a second? Second. Thank you, Mrs. McCabe. Is there any discussion at this time?
Just a quick question for Paul. There's been some recent news, obviously, another district about social media posts of teachers and other things, prospective teachers. Just for the community, I know that we do some background checking. Can you give a little bit of background of what process we go through?
Yeah.
From a personnel perspective?
Yeah. So Marcy Conlon's here. I'll ask her to join us as well. But from the social media lens, one of the things that our school leaders, when they're hiring or a district leader hiring, we always make sure that we do that Google search. We're looking into the background of individuals. There are some certain pieces, and the depth and complexity in which we go to is limited around a number of First Amendment rights. The situation that you're speaking about in Homer, a little different because there was some issues around violence, which put it into another category, but I'll have Marcy jump in and add detail.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much that is what we follow. If there's any concern, usually an administrator would contact me and then we would talk through it. But pretty much for the most part, if there isn't anything that is glaring against the school district or things like that, then staff members are passed through with our background checks like we do, state FBI background checks for all of our employees as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other question or discussions at this time? Okay, Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Yes, Mr. Kuchert?
Yes.
Mr. Lackner?
Yes.
Mr. Lentz?
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe?
Yes.
Mr. McNally?
Yes.
And Mrs. Fairgrave?
Yes. Motion passes 6-0. Now, can I have a motion to adjourn the August 21st, 2023 special board meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. McNally. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lentz. Ms. Marsan, would you please take the roll call vote?
Mr. Lackner?
Yes.
Mr. Lentz?
Yes.
Mrs. McCabe?
Yes.
Mr. McNally?
Yes.
Mr. Kuchert?
Yes.
And Mrs. Fairgrave?
Yes, motion passes 6-0. And the meeting is now adjourned at 5:24 p.m. It just turns green.
Good evening. Welcome to the Learning and Teaching Committee. It's Monday, August 21st at 5:30. We have a pretty important conversations to have tonight. But before we start our agenda, I'm going to ask the superintendent to give us an update on heat.
Yes, I'll give you two updates. One on mold condition within a number of our portables. We have 3 sets of portables throughout our district at North, at Davis Elementary, and at East. Early last week, prior to that, there was some mold detected in a North classroom. We removed everybody from that classroom, did a lot of testing. We're still continuing to wait for testing, but with an abundance of caution, we also wanted to test the mobiles at East and Davis. So we're still waiting for those results to come back. We're hopeful we'll have those by later this week, and then we'll be able to communicate to our Davis staff, our East staff, and our North staff, who are looking to be, because we displaced some classrooms, some staff members are in those mobiles. So once we know, but again, we want to make sure that our spaces are safe for our staff and for our students. That's our primary concern. Again, I'm hopeful we'll have that information by late this week and be able to communicate with our staff across all 3 of the schools in a timely manner. Probably won't be moving back in or whatever we do before next week, if we do anything in those mobiles. On the issue of heat, especially at the elementary level, I've asked Mr. Buxton to give us an update on where we're at and what we're doing with some of the heat that we're expecting that to be pretty excessive later this week.
Good evening. Yeah, with the extreme heat that's forecasted for really starting tomorrow throughout the duration of the week, just want to say how happy I am to collaborate with Organic Life. We worked very quickly to modify our lunch menus for the week. They are going to, and they've actually already put out a modified menu to all of our parents. It's going to be only 1 hot entree per day, try to minimize the use for ovens and such. But we will have our students eating in the classrooms throughout the course of this week, just due to the heat that we're going to be feeling in our schools' cafeterias. In addition, we'll have physical education occurring in classrooms, and we'll also have the midday recess, the one associated with lunch, indoors as well, giving some schools flexibility with those classroom-based morning recesses should the temperatures be conducive to getting kids outside for a little bit. But again, just applaud the collaboration that took place today, as we want to make sure our students and staff are safe for the forecast that's on our way.
Thank you very much. Going back to our agenda, there are no citizen comments at this time. And we are moving into the 1 second. We're going to be discussing the K-12 math vision, and Dr. Igo is working with our technology people to get it prepped. So how is everyone today?
Excellent style there.
A little warm, yeah. It will be warmer tomorrow. And here comes Dr. Igo.
I apologize.
No problem.
We had a little bit of a glitch, wanted to make sure we had everything we needed so we could show you kind of our math vision. But tonight we have Gary Hansen with us. He led our work in our K-12 or EC-12 math vision, and we'd like to share that with you, kind of put it in context so that you can see what we're going to do to kind of build moving forward.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. We'll get the slides up.
Oh, start with the slide deck, though. The slide deck, yeah, we'll ask you to pop out. Yeah, for Zan.
So we'll go ahead and get started talking about our pre-K-12 math vision. And I don't know if this is going to work. No. Okay. Let's see. Perfect. So our outcomes for this evening, to provide some background information on the Math Vision Committee, explain the why and outline the process that we went through this past spring, and share the completed math vision for D303 math. We want to always start with our commitment statement, together building pathways to excellence, and our core values, belonging, perseverance, and achievement. The work that we engaged in this past spring is in direct alignment to all of our values and making sure that we're building those pathways together. Our math committee came together from all over the district. We had a wide range of members. We treated each member with dignity and honored and valued each person's voice to make sure that we were coming up something collaboratively that we could all get behind as a district. The math vision will also help us achieve our strategic priority of instructional coherence by ensuring that all curriculum decisions moving forward are aligned and in service of achieving excellence for each and every one of our students. It will also help us focus our work on utilizing evidence-based instructional practices in the classroom and ensuring that each student is supported on their pathway towards that excellence. So it's in direct alignment with all of our strategic priority outcomes. So we're going to talk about how it was built. So I want to start by kind of reviewing again the CAI process, because part of this work was starting the CAI process for secondary math. And particularly the first stage, the planning stage, we were developing the vision and set of core beliefs. It was the first kind of step in the CAI process and ensuring that we're making the most effective and informed curriculum decisions. This work is going to set us up as we engage in this the CAI process this year for secondary math. And we move into the designing phase and developing and preparing to launch. We'll be reviewing our current curriculum and resources and making decisions moving forward. And this math vision will help guide all of those decisions and the committee work that we engage in. So this is kind of the why, who, and when of our math vision committee. We didn't have this in place, and it was clear there's a lack of alignment between our grade levels and grade bands in terms of what we valued and what we believed in math across the district. There was a lot of different opinions and ideas from elementary, middle, and high school. And so this math vision work allowed us to get everyone in the room together and come up with a common and aligned vision to make sure that our students pre-K-12 were getting the best possible math instruction, and we had the same beliefs so we could kind of drive that work. Also, engaging with our high school math teachers for the last 2 school years, it was clear that this math vision was lacking when we were engaging in previous CAI processes. And so developing this together and collaboratively to make sure that as we move forward with this curriculum process, we're going to be in better alignment and have a more successful implementation and kind of get something that is going to align with our beliefs and also help all of our students. And just overall, there was just a lack of clarity around what our vision and goals and beliefs were around mathematics instruction in the district. We had, like I said, a large diverse team from across the district, included math teachers, coaches, specialists, administrators, lead teachers, and we had representatives from 14 different sites on this team. It included myself, Tina King, Senior Director of Curriculum Instruction, Christine Igo, Jared and Audra were involved as well. So it really included everyone across the district to help make this team come together and help make it work. We engaged in it over the spring. We had 2 half-day professional development meetings and then 2 after-school meetings, which in May, as a teacher, is really difficult to come after school, after a long school year, and really engage in this difficult, challenging work. Our team was really committed and just kind of gave their best, even at that time of school year and at that time of day. And some of the reactions from the work when they kind of shared words and thoughts that they thought of, encouraged, motivated, hopeful, validated, curious. So a lot of positive reactions and a lot of positive thoughts and work came out of these professional development days, again, at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday, and the 2 weeks before summer is really difficult to get. So the process, over the course of those 4 days, We started by by engaging in learning on proficiency, what that entailed, and coming up with common understandings and definitions of proficiency, and reviewing different evidence-based practices. We relied heavily on our NCTM Principles to Actions book, looking at what the different components of proficiency included, including procedural fluency, conceptual understanding, adaptive reasoning, strategic and productive dispositions. We also reviewed the 8 effective teaching practices that NCTM outlines, and kind of use that as the basis and the grounding for our work in this math vision. We had discussions on our current teaching practices. We had discussions on our current strengths, current challenges, and really keyed in on different opportunities that exist across the district to help us move to the next level. One of the things we then engaged in was reviewing benchmark district visions and kind of their values around mathematics. So we did research on what other districts are saying they value and believe in terms of math instruction to make sure that we are in alignment with our comparative and with our aspirational districts, and making sure that we're on the right path. And then ultimately, the teams sat together to collaboratively develop this new vision. They would work in small groups. They would use the template from our K-5 literacy vision that was completed the year prior. And they would develop the draft, provide feedback on the drafts until we came up with our final product. Okay, so all that being said, we're going to share the math vision. And this is just a quick kind of highlight of the vision before we kind of jump into what exactly it looks like. But similar to the layout for the K-5 literacy vision, there are kind of 3 separate components to our vision: our beliefs, the vision for math instruction, and our guiding principles. The beliefs page kind of outlines our overall beliefs about students and proficiency. And essentially, we believe that each student is unique, entitled to a rigorous mathematics program, and is capable of achieving a high level of math proficiency. And that developing that proficiency requires collaborative planning, the use of data, and high quality instruction. Our vision for math instruction is what learning experiences should look and feel like for students. And those learning experiences should develop conceptual understanding and procedural fluency concurrently, make connections between the mathematics that they're learning, see themselves as effective learners, and make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Again, that perseverance aligned to our core values of achievement. And then our guiding principles is how we are going to operate as the adults and staff and teachers in the buildings to ensure that each student has that high quality learning. So our instruction engages each student, is grounded in the development of those 5 strands of math proficiency, uses evidence-based instructional strategies, and provides multiple opportunities for students to demonstrate proficiency. And so I believe in your packets, you should have a copy of the math vision, and it looks like they do not.
Put it up here.
Okay. Sorry, I apologize. I was mistaken. So I'm going to share some of the highlights. On the previous slide, I called out a few things. But again, just talking about how we believe each student is entitled to a rigorous and comprehensive mathematics program that continually challenges and grows their learning, again, tied to our core values. Each student is an active contributor to their own learning. Students are not passive in the classroom, they're active and they're contributing to that learning. And ultimately that each student is capable of achieving a high level of mathematical proficiency. That's kind of a core belief that in order to effectively instruct mathematics, all teachers, all students, all staff members need to have. And that developing that proficiency is complex and systematic process. It's not an easy job. Otherwise, everyone would do it. But only the kind of best and brightest are able to really handle this task. And so similar to what I was talking about before, it requires collaborative planning, high quality instruction, the use of data. A big one here, atmosphere of risk taking, investigation and analysis of real world situations and tasks. Ample opportunities for practice with support to develop procedural fluency and apply skills to authentic tasks, and student reflection and interaction.
We'll make sure that you get a copy of this. We apologize, wasn't in the packet as we had intended, but you'll be able to have that and kind of read through it, and we'll happily answer some questions.
Yep.
I don't know if there's any other pieces. We scroll up so you can see the next step.
Yeah.
Christine, maybe a little bit on the 5 strands. I think would be good to add if you can.
Just are you asking us to explain those to you? Okay, I'm gonna give it to Gary, our math partner.
Yeah, and so conceptual understanding is kind of understanding the big ideas and how the concepts are interrelated. That's where we get into more of the performance-based tasks and the real world problem solving. The procedural fluency is the efficacy with which students can apply the procedures to the different scenarios and tasks. And so that's more when you see kind of the skills that students need to effectively do the mathematics. In previous iterations of curriculum committees and curriculum review processes, I think there's been emphasis in one or the other, but what we're saying is that they're developed concurrently, and there's an equal emphasis on both the procedural fluency and how students are able to quickly and efficiently do the mathematics, but also how they're able to apply those concepts to kind of interconnected mathematics. You then have the strategic competence, which is really knowing what to do and when. So when students are encountered with a word problem or with a real world scenario, how can you strategically approach that problem to ensure that you're getting to that solution effectively? And then we have adaptive reasoning. Things are going to happen when you're completing mathematics, and how do students adapt to the situation? How do they adapt when they're coming across roadblocks or barriers to their learning? And then ultimately the productive disposition is every student sees themselves as a learner and doer of mathematics. We have several students who kind of through experience and through outside influences believe themselves not to be math people. We often hear adults say, I'm not a math person. And so the productive disposition is helping students get that belief that anyone can, and all of our students are capable of performing mathematics and doing mathematics at a high level. Is that?
It's okay. Thank you. It's very
Of course.
helpful.
Awesome.
I think probably the biggest and most important piece as we kind of walk through this really is that idea around concurrent development of. So we are building those things together at the same time. We don't wait until kids are fluent here before we move here to move there, but you need all 3 of those things to kind of be building and moving along the way.
Yep.
So I think that's our biggest takeaway, I think, as we work through this process.
Yep. And similarly, we don't rely totally on just developing conceptual understanding before moving into procedural fluency.
Yes.
They work in concert with each other, and to focus on one before the other is not the kind of best way that students will learn the mathematics. Okay. Go to the-
So I have a couple of questions on some of the wording in the vision. There's a phrase in there that reads collaborative planning. Collaboration amongst whom or between whom? Can you help us understand what you mean by collaborative planning?
Yep,
and how that's different maybe from how we've planned in the past?
So that's just relating to our PLC work and how we were relying on our PLCs to really collaboratively plan together to ensure that the instructional practices that we're using are high quality and evidence-based. Make sure that the resources that we're using, the formative assessments. So a lot of the work that we're going to be engaging this year around the PLC process is directly tied to that. A lot of these things on our vision are things that aren't new to what's been happening in our district. So that people have been collaboratively planning for a long time in our district. This is just outlining all of those things to make sure that we're all clear and that this is what we believe is essential for student success.
Go ahead.
So our next steps with this, so the kind of what now, which is kind of what a lot of our teachers were asking when we were creating this as well. So the next steps, We're going to create a communication plan and we're going to have the vision shared out with teachers and staff across the district. We'll have committee members share this with the teams at their schools. Tina King and myself will be creating kind of a draft slideshow that we can have our committee members share with their schools. So that way all schools are getting the same message and having time to, similar to yourselves, wrap your heads around this and kind of understand what it means and what it will mean moving forward. With our 6-12 math CAI process, that will be continuing this year in September. So we will be gathering the committee and beginning to review resources. We'll be providing an update on that work in January of this school year with the idea of having a resource and plan for moving forward by March to move forward for next year. And so this vision will be a huge role in all of the decisions that are made with the committee work this year. And then just in general, this math vision should be used in PLCs and in future CAI processes to ensure that any decisions from the day-to-day of what lesson we're going to plan, what quiz we're going to make, to the larger what curriculum are we going to use, are aligned to achieving this vision. And this is something that we can kind of continue to review and revisit as new learning comes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or thoughts?
I just had a quick question. I think you had mentioned a term, productive disposition. So throughout the research, I know I've spoken with Dr. Igo a lot about the research that went into this. So I appreciate the collaborative effort. How have folks been successful with kind of improving that notion among students, right? Because to your point, many of us adults say those exact things. I'm not a math person. I never was. How is it that we can get them excited about that? And what did the research say about initiatives to really promote the notion that everyone can do math and that they can do it effectively?
So that there's a couple ways that have had various levels of success. Some of those involve student collaboration. So much like adults, we work better when we're collaborating with peers and sharing ideas. Student collaboration interaction helps to get that point across to students who are able to see themselves as this isn't an isolating thing. This isn't something that you do in isolation. It's not something that you take this kind of one test and you're either can do or can't do mathematics. It's the work that you're doing collaboratively together. All of our teachers on a daily basis are affirming our students' beliefs in themselves on that they're capable of doing this. One of the things that it kind of says in here and in the research is about providing multiple entry points for students. So that way it's not something that they instantly encounter a problem or a task and they hit that roadblock and they don't know what to do, but providing those multiple entry points allows students to kind of see themselves, okay, I'm capable of doing this. And what our teachers do amazingly on a day-to-day basis is they're supporting each and every student. They're walking around the classrooms and they're helping them. They're giving them the support they need to move forward in problems and move forward with tasks. And it's going to be kind of it's a gradual build. Some students have had it kind of that in their system for a long time, so it's a little bit harder to break that and to kind of get them to see themselves as doers of mathematics. But from my experience in the classrooms, all of our teachers are doing kind of really incredible work in that arena. And it's just about kind of continuing to get better in that regard.
Sorry, Jeannie.
I did want to add to that. I think several board members got to go in some math classrooms last year and see the work that our teachers and students are doing with math tasks. So complex novel problems that students are asked to solve instead of here's a procedure, I'm going to do it, then you're going to repeat it, and we're going to practice. This is a different strategy for math instruction that students get to do a real world or very complex math problem for the first time and experience some productive struggle in that problem so that they learn how to persevere and that they also have access to rigorous grade level mathematics. So learning that it's okay to struggle and that you learn from the struggle because the mistakes that you make really guide your thinking. What we're trying to get students to do is develop mathematical models and representations in their thinking so that later in life, when they're presented with a problem, I'm not looking for that, oh, what's that one right answer that I'm supposed to know how to do this? But it's how do I really think that math is a creative process. So I think those kinds of systems and structures develop that productive discipline in math.
I have two pieces. Since this is 6:12, can you just talk a little bit about how this will blend with K-5, pre-K-5? And then my other part, and it may be together, we've been talking about math for a long time. And I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about the CAI process and that I personally think we're on the right track with that process. But what's different about what you're bringing to us now than what we got 3 years ago? Or is there there was more collaboration? I feel like voices were not heard, you know, why are we in a good place now for this vision? What's different? Does that make sense?
I'll kind of start that off. And, you know, I'm going to preface it with, I wasn't necessarily here, kind of walked in as that was coming forward. But I think there's a couple of things that we have that put us in a different spot than where we were. One is that we start, like we do with everything, in building shared knowledge. So you heard them talk about what does proficiency mean? What does evidence and what does research look like? So when we come to the table, we first build a general understanding and we have shared knowledge of the information. Then we start to jump into, now let's talk about what does that mean about a vision, our beliefs, and our guiding principles. It's not, this is what I believe or my opinion. Without the building of the shared knowledge, it becomes a bunch of people coming in the room about, this is my opinion about. And not that your opinion isn't valuable, but we all need to have a place to start in terms of shared knowledge. And then say, so let's compare that opinion with what we've got here and how do we balance that out? And then, you know, Tina does this masterfully, is making sure that every person's voice is heard, acknowledging that, and then working towards, at the end of the day, we've got something that is, we all agree to. And then once you have that in place, that makes the next step of looking at the resource. Well, we've all agreed that these are the things that we want. We're looking for a resource that does these things. Feel free to jump in.
I think being involved in that process in another role 3 years ago, we skipped all these steps. So we just started like, we need a new resource. There was a lack of clarity about why. There was a lack of clarity and consensus around beliefs and evidence-based practices in math. So the change process was difficult because we didn't have, you know, we just didn't have the shared understanding. We didn't have clear direction.
I'd also chime in. I see the strategic plan throughout this whole thing. I saw the collaboration or what our language around professional learning communities. I saw the commitment to grade level and beyond instruction. I saw the commitment to data being there at the table and being informed. I saw all these pieces coming together that allow us to do this work. But what excites me even more is that we have our action plan, that you see this work in our action plans. That's how there are many districts who have strategic plans, but we're doing the work each day. We're working our plan is what we talk about all the time. And what I see here is the district working its plan and continuing to come back and revisit those plans. But I love that it's tied within the strategic plan. It's within the strategic priorities. It's within the action steps, and you absolutely see it within the commitment statement itself. And I would also say the CAI process itself, as others have alluded to, has been transformative within D303 when we began with our literacy work that Dr. Igo led with the support of others, but having a clear, and I think this is the other terminology you continue to hear from our team, clear structures that allow our system to operate at a much higher level. And that's what they're continuously doing, creating really great structures that allow our system to be more effective every day. But it is a process. It's at times a grindy process, but that we keep working it is my message on opening day to our staff. This is hard work. Don't make any excuses about it. This is hard work. But when we create really great structures, it allows our teachers to do the amazing work that they are absolutely capable of doing each and every day.
So just to I guess to clarify, as I look at the planning and the process, the 6 to 12 months, so is it right? I should interpret this that we think that the issue to improving our math understanding of our students and as a result their performance is the resource?
Like everything, it's a piece of, right? So the research is really clear. A high quality resource is absolutely essential to moving kids in their learning forward. You might remember that at the high school level for algebra, geometry, and algebra 2, when we brought forth the recommendation, it was approved for 3 years. So we are entering year 3 of that process. So it's now time for us to say, now that we've got a really clear vision, does this resource get us there? Do we need to look for something new and something different? I will tell you, the teachers are very interested in looking for something new, but now that we've got something to build a foundation from, we can engage in that process to make sure that we have the right resource to help move us forward. I don't know, did I answer your question?
Yeah. So, but we're expanding it beyond high school to middle school as well. And I guess I'm trying to understand, it sounds like there is more to the action plan than just the resource. At least that's what I'm now hearing. I don't see that here. And I guess I'm struggling with, is it really just a resource issue?
I would say it's a part of it. It is absolutely part of, we have to continually have that data at our table. So that's why I really connected into I'm looking at here like it's up there. But the beliefs around the data at our table on a regular basis, that our professional learning communities are coming back, but you have to be grounded in a real high quality resource. And you have to have, what we're doing with our standards and our proficiency scales to make sure that we're teaching grade level and beyond on a continuous basis. So yeah, it's the resource is critical, and you have to have the professional learning community time for teachers to do that. We have that. And we have to make sure that we're really working the process of professional learning communities where we're reviewing data that's not more than 5 days old. And we're reviewing that on a continuous basis to reflect on our instruction. So it's a component.
Can I add to mine, and you can jump into, Tina, is really that there's 2 pieces to that. A high quality resource is absolutely essential. The second part to that is a high quality resource with curriculum based professional learning that supports teachers in implementation, which is a piece that we haven't necessarily had before. And it's something we've put in place with ELA, and we've already seen a little, like, we're going to meet at the beginning of every unit, talk about what's in that unit, unpack that unit, talk about what are those instructional practices. So we're going to be providing that professional learning a little bit differently, because we need both of those things, because the high quality resource is going to have the evidence-based practices in it and those instructional routines. And then we've got to pair that with solid professional learning that isn't just one and done, but that is absolutely tied to the work that teachers are going to do in the next unit that they lead.
So when you come back in 2024, specifically at the high school level, you're going to bring resources for all of the math?
We are going to look at, I'm not saying that.
Well, let me rephrase.
Yeah.
We will have looked at all of the math offerings at the high school, all the way up the line, to ensure that we're providing the appropriate resources and instruction.
Yes, I believe if I'm answering, if I understand your question.
Algebra, geometry, algebra 2, pre-cal, all that.
We're in the process of working on pre-calc. Yes, so we will have that as well. I'm just making sure. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to confirm, we're in essence doing an audit of all middle school and high school math.
We're going to start with an audit across the board. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take that vision and say, at elementary, we believe the resource is exactly what we need, but we're going to make a gap analysis for each of those, and then determine when and where we need to add to, just like we did for ELA. We started in that same spot for ELA of, what does this vision tell us? Do we have, in that case, we didn't have the right resource and we knew we needed to look for something different, but we'll do that across the board and then make decisions about where we go next. So you'll get that update in January. So you'll know what we've decided. And then in March, we'll be back for an approval.
Okay. Yeah. It's just, it's a little more, there's more content, if you will, differing content in math. So that's why I'm just trying to make sure
We're covering it all.
covering it all.
Yes. I think the next presentation is going to help with this question.
Okay.
So.
Well, before we go there, maybe we take this from another lens. We talk about goals in the PLC work. 24-25, that's an entire school year from now before specific change would take place. There are goals that were adopted back in November. There are other complementary goals in the strategic plan that the board adopted. What happens in between then and now for the students who are here now?
Yeah, we continue to work that plan. So we've been working with that current resource. Gary's done a phenomenal job of organizing that, and we have benchmark assessments that we give, and we look at that data. We're going to use that to guide our PLC work and that work that we're doing and bringing evidence to the table every 5 days. So we will continue to do that work. What's kind of nice is that math, we've got a nice structure kind of in place. It's going to give them an opportunity to engage and really understand that PLC learning cycle. So when that new resource comes in, that learning cycle has at least been under their belt a couple of times through when we bring in the next. Feel free to add to that.
Just a follow-up. So we talked a lot about PLC. So when will the board be able to see some interim results as far as how it's working and, specifically at the middle school and high school?
So your first opportunity is September 5th, where Janelle Keating will be here with the board to help educate the board. As we continue to talk about building that shared understanding starts, quite honestly, as the board has already supported a lot of the work within all the work in PLCs, not a little bit of it, all of that work. And then what you will begin to start seeing is we'll bring back evidence of the work that we're doing within our PLCs, that collaboration, the data. And then over time within our success indicators, you have a success indicators in there around those common assessments coming back to the board as part of our data points that we'll be talking through. Those pieces, we hope to have that first one. I'm forgetting, we've got another document that's coming to the board in September that will kind of lay it all out for you when you see all those documents. Off the top of my head, I can't remember the first one.
I just want to clarify. So the formative, I think you're talking about those formative assessments and those common end of unit assessments. We won't have those in place until the following year. So we'll be using iReady to kind of guide us this school year. But I would say the way we set it up is that we've identified that their first PLC learning cycle for ELA and math will start September 18th is when they will start to engage. They're doing some pre-work up front. So they're going to engage in that first learning cycle, which will end then right around winter break. Do I have that right? Winter break. So we'll be able to give you some information about how that first learning cycle went. And in that process, we'll be talking through and working through, like, how is that evidence? We've got clear protocols for people.
So you mentioned iReady. So how are we going to know how the high school is working?
And according to the strategic plan, we're using the grades, is how we're planning that forward.
We also have the benchmark.
Oh, for math. Yes, we do. And you're right. The math. So we have those benchmark assessments so we can bring them by the quarter in terms of how kids are making progress. Thank you for reminding me.
Okay.
So just to kind of make sure, so you'll keep us informed as we go along so we can have this kind of discussion. At the role of the board, though, it's so fun to go into classrooms, but the role of the board is to make sure that we are keeping our feet to the fire. And so I think what you've got planned, and we will make sure that we are listening as you present. I wanted to ask how you saw, this year we will have department chairs. And so how do you see that position working in this process?
They will be pivotal to that position. So really, as we think about kind of the PLC process, the first step is the what, right? Guaranteed and viable curriculum. And we'll be working with our department chairs to establish what that looks like. I remember in that job description, it is part of a chunk of that really is the curriculum piece and building the curriculum, because we need that curriculum expert sitting next to us. So they'll be sitting side by side with us as we do the process, co-leading the process.
Are they already part of the math vision committee?
Yes.
I'm not, because I'm not
Yep.
sure. I saw the lead, but they
Yep,
are.
Yep, they were,
For
yep,
both?
they were last year, and they will be, like Christine said, they'll be helping lead the work this
Okay.
year. Yep.
Thank you.
We've had a lot of conversation about high school catalog. We did a discussion about the AP performance and coursework. There have been various conversations about the entirety of the high school program. As we're thinking about this particular core set of math courses, how should we think about the potential for additional math courses that might not be described or supported by the geometry, algebra material that you bring back to the board? What I mean by that is, could you envision, or if you envision other math courses outside of those algebra, algebra 2, geometry courses, how will we think about those through either this vision or through the process, the CAA process that you've described? And how will that integrate with a broader consideration of whether or not we have the entirety of all the required or potential math courses?
Yeah, so you're kind of, we'll see a little bit of that in our next presentation, but more importantly, and planning to bring next time when we come, is to have that conversation around really the course offering book is just a book that holds all of the courses that, we've identified. But really that our hopes and our plans to bring forward to you is that we're going to look at that department by department and really unpack what is it we have? How does that align? Where is it? How does that work together so that we can then bring back, here's the recommendations that we need. Once we know what we need, we'll then say, now let's talk about how that fits into this CAI process, or where that in which part of that process it fits. As with many things, as you start to get into it, and we've just started a brief, I want to be honest, a total, just a view, we see lots of opportunities, and we're very excited about this idea of going department by department and really thinking about what it is kids need based upon what their end goal is, and making sure we have everything in alignment. So I see us doing it. If that's the way that you all agree with our thinking, that will be how we process that. And then we'll talk about, with that, we'll come and here's how we're going to roll it into our CAI process, so that we get the curriculum and the resources we need.
So if I heard you rightly, the department chairs and this vision team, and through the CII process, there will be some additional consideration for not only the material to support the courses that we have today, but the potential to envision courses we might offer in the future. Is that
Correct.
about right?
Yes, but I want to also be clear, that won't be coming to the board in March of 2024. A resource won't be coming because we'll have to build the course first. Okay, just want to be clear.
But will you have the recommendations for the courses though? What do you anticipate?
That'll be in a separate process outside of this process, but we will have, again, we need to kind of talk through. We're going to go department by department, and how we prioritize those departments will determine when that comes to the board.
Okay, so it'll be considered as part of this discussion, but there won't be anything actionable until a separate review.
Yes.
Okay.
So just to make sure I could say it back to someone else. So this vision is going to guide a lot of work. And the idea that maybe we are missing some pieces, or there are areas that we need to add to that vision conversation. Knowing the vision could also make us see what kids are missing or should have, or am I?
Maybe. So the vision really just kind of sets up, what is it we want for math instruction? What do we want to see? What does quality instruction look like in order for, we believe, for kids to learn and become proficient? So that guides just how we set things up. The separate issue that I believe Mr. Lackner is talking about is the courses that we offer. And those courses, that's part of that department piece. Now, once we decide here are the courses that we need or don't need, or reorganize, We then lean into the vision to say, but whatever we put in place has to align to this vision and how the work is that we do which then tells us here's the resource that we need to support that work. So we're a little we're not as beautiful of a through line as we'd like, because we started some work and not other work. So we need to kind of keep the work going that we're doing, but also keep pushing forward so that what we end up with is a strong result for kids, a strong curriculum for kids.
And just a quick add on to that, since this was part of our discussion that we had too, that department by department analysis, one of the goals of that would be to include an analysis of the course offerings and the pathways of both comparable and aspirational districts too. So we'll use them as a resource. Hey, these are resources that are offered at districts we want to be like, or we aspire to be like, and then we can, give some deep consideration as to whether or not it makes sense for our student base and whether we should be offering those courses.
And that's a separate timeline from this. effort.
It's unrelated. Yes. I mean, they're kind of running like this. They're like this that will eventually go like this.
I think that's thank you for both the visual and I think that's part of the point that I was trying to get to, is that when we think about whatever resources brought back to the board table, the board will be asked to make a decision with, in some sense, blinders on, because we won't see the relationship between that material necessarily and the future course catalog. And then we'll be in a 3-year lock-in to that material without having had the consideration of what courses to the left or right of that core course need to be supported. And so I would encourage the team to think about what that potential range of courses would be, and potentially as a factor in the consideration of whatever resources are brought back, some envisioning of a long list of potential math courses such that the core course material is at a minimum potentially supportive conceptually and fits with those other courses, even if we don't get to implement them in 24, 25, or even 25, 26, we'll still have this material in the schools. And so I just say, open the aperture as widely as you can in terms of consider courses, so that when the investment is made here at the table, it's made with those in mind.
I know you're not making a motion, but I want to second that. Just to say, especially when you guys are looking at it, when you bring those materials back to us, I would include that as a section of why in the recommendation, so that it's very explicit, so that the board and then future boards can see the consideration that was made, so that when we look back on this, right, there aren't, I think, Dr. Argy, you did a good job of kind of summarizing some of the challenges previously of like, hey, we chose this. Nobody really remembers why, right? That would be something that would be definitely helpful to the board in the decision making, and then to future boards as well as the community at large.
Sure. And I envision, and I'll bring it back and make sure you're there, but it would look very similar to what we did with ELA, which is where we did say, here's all the considerations we did. Here's how we ranked it. Here's why we ranked it. Here's how we got here, so that you'll have that information. So we did that with ELA. So our plan would be to do the same thing moving forward.
And we did add to the CAA process a pathway consideration as part of our work moving forward. So that will be part of our work.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you very much.
Yes, outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you. And then you'll also be sending us the
vision. You have it in what
It's
you
on-
received if you clicked it, but I'll make sure you get it separately. So it's not a
Thank
problem.
you so much.
Yeah.
All right, so to continue on with our math conversation, we're going to now talk about algebra. And you didn't have to move, right? You're here. Welcome back. So turn it over to you. Is Kevin? Okay.
He's just watching.
So what a great night, because it's math, and more math. I'm very excited to be here. We're going to talk more about 8th grade algebra and what algebra acceleration could look like in our district. So this work is aligned to our commitment statement, building pathways to excellence, specifically to achievement, and our core value of engaging in continuous improvement to attain ambitious goals. So when we look at our instructional coherence, we are focused on that strategic priority, and especially when we think about a guaranteed and viable curriculum, And we also aspire to build math pathways that are accessible and support each student's goals and aspirations. All right, so our goal, 3 goals when we talk about algebra acceleration. We want to ensure that each student is college and career ready by providing courses that allow students to master grade level standards. We want students to be able to develop and show proficiency on our state assessments, IAR and SAT, and then also to have access to higher level math courses like calculus and pre-calculus prior to high school graduation. And then we're going to look at our outcomes for tonight. So in our presentation tonight, we're going to describe kind of our current reality. What are our current math pathways? We're going to explain the research on acceleration of Algebra I in 8th grade. We're going to look at some outline the practices of those algebra in 8th grade in our benchmark districts and identify possible pathways that could meet this goal. So let's look at our current practices. So to begin the conversation, I'd like to present our current math pathways. We have 3 pathways running concurrently now. We have an academically talented pathway that begins either in 4th grade or 6th grade in the district. It allows students to have access to calculus in 11th grade and thereby completion of Algebra II before their SAT. We have an accelerated pathway that begins in 6th grade and middle school. That also gives students access to finishing Algebra II prior to their SAT in 11th grade, and then access to calculus as a 12th grader. And then we have our standard pathway that begins with the Common Core standards in middle school and progresses to a culmination of 12th grade pre-calculus, if that's a choice. And then students during their SAT in their junior year would be in Algebra II, that course. And if we want to think about this and make this really concrete, right now on our current 9th graders, we have 44% of our students in the AT math pathway and in the accelerated math pathway, so that those students all have access to calculus before they graduate and the completion of Algebra II before their SAT. All right, so we're going to look at kind of what is the projected acceleration of our students in the next 4 classes. So when we look at this table, you can see the percent of students in that AT pathway, the percent of students in our accelerated pathway, and then adding those 2 together, that gives us the percent of students that are in 8th grade Algebra I in middle school. So we just talked about our current freshman class at 44% of those students having access to 8th grade algebra. And then our current 8th grade class, the projected percentage of students would be 45%. In our 7th grade class, 56%. And then in our 6th grade class, 49%. So you can see that we've had a gradual increase of students in that pathway. Prior to 2022, we had 35 to 42% of students in that accelerated and AT pathway. And now we're going to go on and look at some historical practices and research on acceleration of 8th grade algebra in middle school. So when we go back into the history of math acceleration, we can see 2 things happening simultaneously. Prior to the adoption of the Common Core standards in 2010, there was a lot of repetition of math content and topics in kindergarten through 8th grade. The research came out that really for students to be college and career ready, they needed to take Algebra I in 8th grade. Now, happening simultaneously was the development of the Common Core standards, which took away all of that repetition in K-8 math and took the Algebra I content and moved it down into middle school. So at the same time, researchers were saying, hey, wake up, everybody. We need people to be in algebra in 8th grade. The math scholars were saying, we really need to look at our scope and sequence in math. So those things happened at the same time. So once the Common Core was implemented in 2014 in Illinois, the urgency to put all students in algebra in 8th grade to be college and career ready was diminished. And when we looked at the studies on acceleration of 8th grade algebra in middle school, we have some major findings we'd like to share with you. 3 essential findings are that middle school math concepts are critically important, not only for high school success, but also for college preparation. Middle school concepts of ratio, proportion, expressions, and equation are critical to success in college, in courses in science and other disciplines, economics, so that they shouldn't be skipped. We shouldn't be skipping middle school math now that we've changed the standards. And the third piece is that students that are prematurely accelerated without readiness into Algebra I have negative consequences. They are less likely to pass geometry or Algebra II if they were unsuccessful in Algebra I in middle school. And there's not a direct relationship between algebra in 8th grade and higher outcomes for students in high school and college. But there is a threshold effect. And the research really shows that if you are above the 50th percentile in achievement in mathematics in middle school, then you have accelerated and exponential growth then in your path moving forward. But if you're below that 50th percentile in mathematics in middle school and you are accelerated, then you have some unattended and negative consequences. So there's 2 conditions that need to be met for students to be successful when they're accelerated in Algebra I in middle school. And the first is that prior achievement in mathematics. And the second one is they need to be in an accelerated pathway that compacts the middle school curriculum rather than skipping content. So if these 2 conditions are met, so we're above that 50th percentile in mathematics achievement, and then they have access to a curriculum that is compacted rather than skipping, then they will benefit from acceleration in middle school. So the consensus of the research overall is when students take Algebra I is less important than whether students are ready to take Algebra I.
So before we move into the benchmark districts, can we talk a little bit about our district?
Sure.
I'm looking at these numbers and looking at the percentages of students. I have to wonder about what the test scores look like for D303 students who have experienced each of these. If we have SAT as a terminal score associated with math, and we've adopted that score, the state's adopted that score as our measure of proficiency, then historically, how have folks who have gone through the AT math path or the accelerated path or the standard path performed? We can see the percentage who participate, but not the results of their participation reflected here. And so when we talk about the research and we say, well, the compaction of content or the early participation in content versus skipping content is positively correlated with good outcomes, I have to wonder, is there an opportunity for us to take some of that content that needs to be covered by middle school, not necessarily in middle school, and ensure that it's been covered earlier such that we are compacting from day one rather than compacting in middle school with a double whammy. And so I see the research, I see the things that you've shared, but both of those questions just scream at me. One is how have the kids who have gone through our program performed? And is there distinction based on these pathways? And then the second is, where are the opportunities to provide that compacted experience earlier rather than
Later.
here, right?
Well, we do have a compacted curriculum already moving in with our AT students. It starts in 4th grade. And our data is clear. Our highest achieving students continue to perform well on the SAT. So those 2 things are correlated in our district as well.
But I think what I'm hearing you say is you want to know specifically, and we can certainly, I do have some of that data. I don't have it with me today, but I'm happy to share that back with you.
Yeah, it's not a question of the specifics. It's a question
okay.
of the philosophy. So what you're saying, what I hear you saying is, hey, it may not be that important for us to get to 8th grade algebra, but instead to get it to success in algebra.
Correct.
We could stipulate that and say, that's lovely. And probably be done with that conversation pretty quickly and then say, okay, what is the way to get most students to successful algebra as quickly as possible? That's a totally different question and one we should be asking.
So if you could hang with us for just a little bit, I think we're going to answer that question.
So the other question I had, I'm interested, kind of along that same line. I was interested in, if you look at our current pathways for the students that have gone the standard pathway, how they have performed on math SAT to begin with. So what we're seeing, that distribution, and then also for the accelerated, how have we looked at and how have we overlaid the honors component? Anecdotally speaking and talking to some of our expert teachers, they have told me that's taking standard pre-calc trig, for example, and then going to AP calculus is very challenging. And so I don't see that piece in the accelerated. There's got to be an honors component to it. So I don't know where that falls in.
Yeah, so I think that would be, as we think about where we're at, that's a piece that we need to do and really unpack is what does that look like? What is honors? When and where do we offer honors and what does that look like? I still think those are areas that continue to be unclear for us.
And I can say when I created this graphic, I purposely didn't put honors or not honors on here because there are lots of different choices in the pathways. It's very hard to get it on one slide.
And that, yeah, and I definitely appreciate that. But and just as I'm, I absolutely appreciate the fact as well. The ultimate goal is, I think, of the board is for the student to be successful in the math concept and the math concepts. And how do we, to Mr. Lackner's point, accelerate that so that they're prepared for the SAT or whatever the path is. But if you peel back that onion a little more, again, I see the accelerated pathway, but that is not linear to prepare the student to be successful for AP Calc.
Okay. I hear what you're saying. I don't have an answer for you, but
Yeah.
I can absolutely put that as part of our research
Okay.
when we're thinking about those pathways.
And we talked about at the AP audit presentation, the need for the AP pre-calculus.
Yeah.
So perhaps that is an answer to your question moving forward.
Yeah.
Well,
This seems
will
like
that just push the bridge? So does that just push it down to the, the Algebra 2 to pre-calc jump? You
Right.
see the challenge? Is there how do you ramp on, I guess is the
Right.
issue.
So I'm just wondering if we could finish the presentation. I'm happy. I think we've got some ideas on how to get there and create some on-ramps at the high school level. And it might not be exactly what you're thinking about, but I just want to show you some of our thinking.
that's one of my questions.
Okay, so looking at our benchmark district practices, we just wanted to put it in perspective, and this is just talking about algebra in 8th grade and not changing what we're doing K-5 necessarily, but across the country, there's only 75 school districts that require Algebra 1 as the standard pathway for students in grade 8. And to put that in perspective, that's less than 1%, 98,000 over 98,000 school districts in the US. Most of D303's comparable and aspirational benchmark districts only offer Algebra 1 in 8th grade as an accelerated pathway. Again, we're just addressing that question. If we think out of the box, then that's a different kind of research that we need to do and consider. The percentage of students completing an accelerated pathway, again, like I said, it's not a one-to-one correspondence. It doesn't always increase performance on state assessments. So we can look at, this is cohort data. So these are students that were in 8th grade in 2019. So we can see in our benchmark districts, the percent of students that were accelerated in 8th grade algebra in middle school. And then we can see their scores for the whole district overall in the 8th grade IAR. So we see the percentage of students that met or exceeded standards. And then we can see their 11th grade 2022 SAT scores. And I think this does give us a picture of the mixed results. It's not always put more students in algebra, get higher SAT scores.
I'm confused with what is the percentage indicating for the 2022 SAT?
That is the percent of students meeting the college and career readiness standard.
So that's a hurdle rate?
Yeah, what is the SAT score?
It's the ISB score, and Dave Chazal, it's 540. they need a 540 in math.
When we talk
So
about
this is the
being
percent of
proficient,
students who have achieved a 540 or better.
who are considered proficient in the grade level standards as established by ISB. So which is a 540, yes, but I just wanted to point that together.
Well, but I want to make sure the unit of measurement is the SAT result.
Yes.
Okay.
So, for example, in our district, 41% of students in 2019 were in grade 8 algebra. But overall, 62% of our students met or exceeded the standards for grade 8 proficiency. And then in their 11th grade year, 54% of those students achieved that 540 scale score on the SAT.
Just so you know, this slide is different than what we have in our hands.
Oh. I don't know if we can. refresh
Everything up to,
get it,
so
or-
we don't have scores in the 8th grade IAR meets exceeds. We only have scores for Batavia, Wheaton, and Lake Zurich.
Slide 16 is different and slide 17 is different. Those are different.
Yeah. I think this is a totally different slide than what's in the packet.
Yeah, what we have.
This is not, you're right. I apologize.
Yeah.
You're right. That is, I think.
So is this the one we want to be watching?
Yes, please. Please. So the story, we can see the story is mixed. If we look at our district first, and then if we consider Barrington as another example, they accelerated more students in 8th grade algebra, but they had less students meeting overall proficiency in 8th grade. You can infer maybe that they're not using a compacted curriculum and maybe they're skipping standards. So they have less proficiency in 8th grade. And then they had 1% greater students meeting that 540 threshold on the SAT. But then when you look at Naperville, 203, they accelerate much less students into algebra in 8th grade, but they are 61%, almost 62% of their students meeting proficiency overall in 8th grade. And then they have the highest SAT achievement scores with 59% of their students achieving that 540 threshold. So we can see that it's not always put more students in 8th grade algebra get higher SAT scores. So there's multiple things going on here with curriculum, resources, instructional practices, many puzzle pieces there.
Do we know if Naperville is doing more compacted, like we were talking about, or?
Yeah, we're going to
Yeah,
actually present what they're doing, and Gary was able to speak to them and visited last year to see some of the things that they're doing that are different from what we're doing right now. So let's go and look at what are some optional pathways for us moving ahead. So our recommendation is that we maintain our current middle school pathways, the grade 8 math being the standard pathway, but we'd like to look at developing multiple accelerated pathways in high school. Our recommendations are to develop an Algebra I with geometry course, very similar to Naperville 203 and Hinsdale. We can also allow students to enroll simultaneously in algebra and geometry, so they can get to that Algebra II before the SAT, and then also have access to calculus in high school. We also could provide opportunities for geometry during summer school or in an online forum. We'd like to align the pathways to your post-secondary plan. So if parents and students know right out front and transparent, their goal is a highly selective college or a STEM major, then what should my plan be to get to calculus in high school? If I'm a liberal arts major, maybe my pathway is more geared to AP statistics or pre-calculus in high school. So here's a possible pathway model that we could use. So students progressing through the traditional standard pathway in middle school, but then a decision point being in before beginning 9th grade, If you're interested in a STEM career and you want to get to calculus before graduation, you could participate in an Algebra I course where we had geometry integrated. And this is what Naperville 203 is doing right now. And they've had a lot of success with that. So they've put the geometry in with the algebra. So when I'm working with equations, I'm also solving geometric applications. And then students are able to go right to 10th grade in Algebra 2, thereby finishing Algebra 2 before their SAT and then giving them access to calculus in 12th grade. Another opportunity is a summer bridge where students participate in Algebra 1 in 9th grade, allowing them all the standards in middle school math that we just talked about are so important. But then they could take geometry either in person or a virtual geometry class, and then giving them access again to Algebra 2 to finish as a 10th grader before the SAT and calculus in high school. That decision point could be after 9th grade. We have several more possible pathways available, but we'd like to take those conversations to math teachers, the experts, to really talk about what's possible in our district and what could acceleration pathways look like in high school.
I think our big takeaway as we looked at the research really was about the importance of making sure that we are strong and foundational with our students at the K-8 level, and then thinking differently about high school. So our current pathways really don't provide any on-ramps for acceleration once they enter high school, right? Like they have to have accelerated either in grades 4 or grade 6 in order to get there. But what we don't want to do is take something away, because we know it's really important to build that foundation, but yet continue to think about, but how can we then accelerate kids in high school so that they can still get to the same goal and still be successful? So really thinking through how do we get Algebra 2 to everybody before grade 11, but by also making sure we aren't skipping something that puts kids and making them more vulnerable to not being successful later.
So if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like we're giving additional options. So if we didn't start accelerated, for all those parents and all the feedback that we've gotten of like taking that, now we have additional pathways in high school. That's what the recommendation is.
That is correct. And I'm just going to talk a little bit. I have a little bit of inside knowledge around 203 and their philosophy around math, and they hold pretty strong to the philosophy of solid elementary middle school math, which is why those numbers are lower for Algebra 1 in 8th grade. That's an intentional decision for them, which was why then they thought about how do I then create accelerated pathways when students enter into high school.
So what has been the feedback from middle school and especially high school teachers related to the two possible pathways?
That we need to go and have that conversation with them.
So we haven't really vetted this then.
No, we need to
Okay.
run it. They've been on vacation. We're just back. But we wanted to provide you with the information and let you know that there are ways for us to do that without rushing without putting a pathway in that might put kids on, make kids more vulnerable to not doing as well.
I have a quick question. I think it was slide 15, where we were talking about less than 1% of the school districts require Algebra 1, a very exceedingly small number of them, right? In 8th grade, I think you mentioned 70 school districts or something out of quite a few. Yeah. So how do those districts perform, right? So my mind started going, are these college prep districts? Are these primarily STEM focused districts? I appreciate the aspirational district comparison because that's what we're comparing ourselves against. But I was just curious, how do those select few districts perform when they require it by 8th grade?
We didn't dig into that data, but the research has shown that when those policies are in place, most places have gone back and taken it out because kids haven't been successful if they're not ready. So we would have to dig to figure out exactly what that looks like. But generally, when you read the research, anybody who's gone to making it as a mandatory in grade 8, within a few years goes back and undoes that work because they start to see kids are struggling.
Yeah, because I was curious if it was because of that, or it was because they're just unique in their process and the students that can exceed at that.
Sure. And just to be clear, there are 75 school districts that do it. That doesn't mean that their scores look better. right? Or are more successful. And we didn't necessarily pull through, but there is one district, our aspirational district, it's Killdeer. That has about 90% of their kids that will have algebra before they leave us. But when you look at their scores, I can't tell you what they do on the SAT because multiple school districts feed into Stevenson. So it's really hard to pull that apart, but I can say, help me out here. It's like 90% of kids, but only 65% of those kids are meeting on the IAR in 8th grade. So that tells you that just being there isn't necessarily getting them the proficiency.
Yeah, their students actually performed under District 303 in the 8th grade IAR. Again, most likely because they're skipping 8th grade math standards.
Well, do we know that? Are they skipping them or have they just been pushed further down content wise?
That's hard to tell.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
They're not meeting the 8th grade standards. Even if they got them in 6th grade or 4th grade, they're not meeting what the IAR is testing is 8th grade.
Yes, if 91% were accelerated in algebra in 8th grade, but only 63% are actually meeting 8th grade standards.
I just can't help but keep coming back to slides 7 and 8 and think about the percentages here. And we have a recommendation in front of us that says, let us push to the end the double up. In the last possible year that before an SAT, let's do the double up then. And yet we have evidence that kids who have taken content more aggressively on the left-hand side of this screen tend to do better. Those two things seem in conflict to me. And so when I look at these numbers of 44%, 45, 56, 49, I just can't help but wonder how those test scores would look if those percentages were 10 percentage points higher in every one of those buckets. And what it would suggest is that those students are having success in AT or in accelerated. And so
Agreed. We're not looking to take it away.
it's not a question of take away. It's a question of double down. How do we get the maximum number of kids to go through the AT program and the accelerated program? It's not a question of required by 8th grade. It's a question of what's the maximum numbers of students who are ready to be successful
Agreed.
in 8th
Agreed.
grade. So I'm just really struggling, guys, to say, we're going to wait until the last possible year and then double kids up so that they can get ready. And when we talk about things like IAR in 8th grade, and I think, here's a group of students who are taking an Algebra I class and the IAR is built on 8th grade standards. Yes, they would have had that a year and a half ago. And so maybe there's a test effect here for us to think about. It doesn't wash for me logically to say we are going to double up right before the test. It just feels wrong.
Yeah, and that is not what we are saying, or that's not what we're trying to say. Because we still believe we should be working to get as many kids into accelerated and AT pathways as possible. That should be the way we go for the kids who are ready. But for those kids who aren't ready, we should still have a pathway that allows them to get to the goal of completing Algebra II. So I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm clearly not understanding, and I apologize, Mr. Lackner.
I don't think the board has ever said that Algebra I should be the standard.
Yes,
for
we did.
8th.
Yeah, we did in the last meeting.
Well, perhaps I think we're talking semantics, maybe to me.
Okay.
We're never gonna, I don't like to say never, but we will likely always need to have multiple pathways, and we will need to have a standard pathway in 8th grade for math. It won't be appropriate for every student to be successful taking algebra. What we're trying to figure out is how do we need to make changes to the curriculum, or how do we get to the point that we can increase the percentage of students that take algebra in 8th grade?
Agreed. I'm so sorry. I thought the last time we came, my confusion was people were saying,
Correct.
okay,
That
thank
is-
you.
Let the
That's what we
record,
said.
I mean, we had a conversation about every student having 8th grade math. We came in here tonight to make sure that to bring research forward to say, we don't believe every student should have 8th grade math. We absolutely believe what the board is saying is more students need to achieve at a higher level in mathematics. And how do we do that? One, we have, I know this is going to sound like a broken record, but we have to be teaching grade level standards and beyond in every course. It starts there. It starts at the very earliest age and moves through. We have to have our professional learning communities really working through that whole process of looking at data. We have to have great curriculum that supports. We have to have professional learning that brings all those pieces together. We know those processes and that work going into it. And we really believe by following the process, we will get more and more students into being in that 8th grade algebra courses over time. But to be clear, we came in tonight talking about 8th grade for all, 8th grade algebra for all. That's was my communication to my team. And if I failed in that, that is 100% on me and no one on. No one else.
I
Just to
said it.
but just to clarify, in that same conversation previously, it was also acknowledged, we won't get to 100% for 8th grade standard algebra. I mean,
I'm just saying what I must have given my team bad information because that was what it's not on.
I know that I said it. Okay, and so I said we're looking for 8th because that used to be the gatekeeper. I've had conversations with you and with you about it. So I think you presented what at least we told you on that meeting. I would like to just switch it for a second because I don't believe that it's this problem. It's what parents need to know in 4th grade about the choices that their children can have. AT math has been looked, now maybe I'm wrong, but in the past was looked as the gifted kids in math. They had a separate teacher. They had, it was accelerated. And if you didn't score, you didn't get in there. And then we started to say, okay, well, you get another chance, maybe in 5th grade and then in 6th grade, and it changed to accelerated. So there are some historical pieces here where groups of kids, probably somewhat like AP, groups of kids who did not know that they had other opportunities, nor was it in the schedule. And I bet it was also not a classroom teacher knowledge, that there's a reason why we do what we're doing to get more kids to be successful in math. Maybe that's changed, but it was pretty clear not too long ago.
it is, well, but I mean, each student does have to demonstrate proficiency to be able to succeed in AT math.
Right, but there's also opportunities that I don't believe everybody understands, that you don't have to be gifted to get into AT math. You have to be successful in math to get there. And I'm not sure if that's always well known. Now, maybe I'm wrong.
I hear you. And yes, I do think so. And when I think about what I think now you're asking about is like, how do we make sure we're getting more kids up there into more kids are ready to accelerate in either 4th grade or 6th grade, which is what we need. It really is using the curriculum. Like we have a really strong elementary curriculum. It's very strong. And our test scores show us that kids are responding. When you look at our test scores, they are getting better every year. We're starting to see that get stronger. And it's the way in which we're teaching it at K3, which is we're saying you have to, that there are multiple ways to come at this. There's lots of ways we're concurrently teaching conceptual and procedural knowledge. As we have more kids who build and understand those skills, they're in a better position to accelerate, which will then get more kids into 8th grade. Like that's the progression. And that's how we get more kids in 8th grade. And then we keep thinking about where are those on-ramps that where we can compact and offer more. Tina, and this is so much more your arena.
Well, I think to Mr. Lackner's point about why double up in high school, we can start in 6th grade. We have an accelerated pathway that's proven, that's already successful. We could get more students in at 6th grade. The kind of caveat there is, what about the negative consequences when students aren't successful in algebra in 8th grade? So the research has that threshold mark about 50 percentile. So that's a consideration, but definitely we could start in 6th grade.
I think I appreciate the conversation. If you sense passion from the board, it's because this is one of the most important things for the board to consider. And so the idea that we've put to bed the notion that, or that we've heard the recommendation rather, that a standard, a requirement all students must go through Algebra 1 in 8th grade. I think the board hears the recommendation. Administration saying that's probably a bad idea. So that's clear. And I appreciate the conversation around it. I think the better question for us to ask is, where do we double up? When do we double up? How does the board get comfortable with the assertion that you've made around how things are going in elementary? We haven't seen a lot of movement in test scores at the high school level. And I recognize we have, kids that have to go through the program. So the question just becomes, we can go through this discussion about the high school textbooks and the courseware, but when I see a slide like this, the high school results are built in these 3 columns. And so these percentages at 45 to 50% seem too low. So for us to have effect.
If I can just jump in. In the last, I had questions written in our last, and most of them were answered, but I'm seeing this is consistent with the concern that you expressed as well about those courses that we don't currently offer. And where does that pathway start? Well, the sooner the better, I think is really the answer. And I agree, doubling up. I certainly would not expect that was going to be the standard to double up in freshman year of high school so that we can pack that in. I think that would be, but on the other side, we did have a discussion and I know where you got the idea. I was a bit taken aback, and then I did hear the clarification that Mrs. Fairgrieve mentioned. But we did kind of say, we wanted to push algebra in 8th grade. And I can see why you would think, well, all right, that's what they want the standard to be. I think all along the standard has been, or our aspiration has been to get as many kids as possible. And Mrs. McCabe, you and I have agreed on this for a long time. The sooner, the better we can get these kids. So all of these things they kind of operate together. If we want these pathways and additional pathways, we really do have to look at the younger grades, and I don't think we can wait.
The sooner the
for the
better.
on-ramp.
Oh, I apologize.
No, I'm just saying, the on-ramp, I don't think we want our on-ramp to be 9th grade.
I think it needs to be one of. I think it's really important to give multiple opportunities. And you're right. For us, it is making sure we have more students into that pathway who are ready. It's probably the most important thing that we need to make sure that is there, that they're ready for that, because we know the research is too overwhelming in this area when they're not ready. Because when we can look at the state of California, when they went all in here, we know the effects of that. It was not positive for kids. Now, who knows all the behind the scenes, all those pieces, those are really important, but we have our job. And I hear you, and I appreciate the passion. This is what committee meetings should be about. This is good stuff for the board, for our administration, for our community, and our staff to have these kind of rigorous conversations at the table. Our job is to make sure, you're right, getting more students ready for Algebra 1 sooner, better. You're right. We have 44% in these 2 columns here. How do we increase that? How do we do that better? And you're right. It's at an earlier age, but it also goes back to continuing to do the hard work that we're doing currently, because that is starting to show, pay some dividends there. I believe, I know this will come as a surprise, that I believe our professional learning communities, our data, and our time together where we're looking at evidence and coming back as educators to really think through the instruction. Again, paired with great curriculum, amazing teachers, data, making decisions, moving that piece forward will work long-term for exactly what the board is asking for. I know that to be true.
So if I could just jump in, because I had one other question I wanted to ask, because we know there are 75 school districts that have required Algebra 1. And we know that most of our comparable and aspirational benchmark districts offer it. Across the country, how many offer it? Do we know that number? And
75.
No, I'm saying offer, not there's 75 that require.
Require.
Offer.
That
How
have
many-
it as an accelerated pathway. Is that
How
where-
many
yeah,
offer the
you can get that.
accelerated
I mean,
pathway?
It's almost,
It's actually very low because there are a lot of school districts, when we think about all the rural school districts in the US, that they don't have access to those accelerated courses.
Right, and so, and I guess that's kind of where I'm going with this is where when we look at not just success and of our aspirational and comparable districts, but across the country, what's the success? And I know we had some information on that, but as an offered accelerated pathway.
the research that we looked at really indicated when kids are ready, that accelerated pathway is the push is everybody should have Algebra I in middle school as an accelerated pathway. That when kids are ready, that is the exact thing that they should have. That's what the research tells us. But it also says, but be cautious when people go all in, which I get that's not where we're at, but if people go all in, that's where the problems become. So we have to be careful to make sure that we're giving kids the foundational skills so that they can be successful in those higher level courses. And so I think everyone's in agreement. We absolutely want as many kids as possible, but we have to do that in a way that doesn't sacrifice foundational skills for kids.
So I don't want to pile on about the giving additional start early, right? But I do want to state that I like having the additional options in high school where, again, if a child and parents are determining, the future, right? We're much more mature at that stage, giving them an option and not being able to go to them, hey, by the way, you missed out. The chance to get into this math was in fourth grade. And I'm sorry, that option is off the table for you. For our district, I don't think that's acceptable. And that's why I just want to make sure that does not get lost in this, because again, I think that is aspirational and that is something good that we should strive for, to give that optionality, because we're much more mature when we're starting to look at careers, when we're starting to look at colleges, and I don't want to preclude a student, and parents from options.
No, if just to clarify my statement, that's kind of what I was driving at is I don't want it to be the only on-ramp, but I do want it to be an on-ramp.
So just do it all.
No problem.
Got it. Yesterday.
Any other thoughts? Thank you. And again, with people who watch and listen to us, I think this is the kind of passion that you wanted us to have in our.
I'm sorry, I do have one more question.
Oh.
That, no more on-ramp?
Yeah, no.
No, I just, how long has 203 been doing the geometry with algebra? Algebra I with
5 years,
geometry.
6 years.
We'll get an exact.
Yeah, I
answer
can
for
get you an exact number. I was there when they did it, so it was,
So it's been
it's
at
in
least
the
a couple
last
years.
10 years, yeah.
Now back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation and for helping us clarify where we are. Appreciate it.
Really good.
All right, we are now going to move it there. We have an audience here who's been waiting for the next item. So thank you. I'm sure on the first Monday or the second Monday of the school year, sitting in a board meeting is not what you expected to do. But thank you for being here.
We do have air conditioning though.
We do have air conditioning. That's right. So our next one, Mr. Kuchert and I talked to administration about bringing this forward at this time so we could have a conversation about the elementary grade level configuration. And so that's one reason why we are not looking at the course catalog for high school. That will be coming up probably next month. So I just would like to lay the foundation as we look at the passion that we just had, but that it's important for us as a board to ask and as many questions and unpack things as deeply as we can. And just because we ask a question or we think of something about what the conversation is, doesn't mean that we have landed on an answer. And the community, as well as those of us at the board table need time to really think through things. And so please ask your questions, please talk through what you're thinking so that we are well prepared for whatever area or decisions we go.
No, I appreciate that, Ms. McCabe. And this conversation will, like other conversations, will occur over time. We'll be back to the board again after this conversation. So there'll be multiple opportunities for the board to engage in conversation, asking the questions. But with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Igo to start the conversation on grade level configurations.
So our
You did.
outcomes for this evening are to provide a little bit of history as it relates to the Davis-Richmond grade level configuration, explain the research as it relates to grade level configuration, and outline next steps and considerations that we need to think of as a board. Again, as we mentioned previously, the core values of our strategic plan are designed to help us make decisions. It's really important that we think about and we're focusing in on that idea of belonging, our perseverance, as well as achievement, and that we're thinking from the lens of not only how are we ensuring that the decisions that we're making are allowing us to push and continue to move forward some of those strategic priorities we have. You've seen this before when we were talking about kind of our facilities. We really broke down kind of our master facility plan into kind of two big pieces. One really is this urgent idea, and we talked about the need to really address that overcrowding and space inequity and high need capital projects. We have done that. So that was what we did back in July when we said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to reopen Fox Ridge, make all those moves. And the next step now is we need to reboundary, right? And so that is what this conversation is tonight. It really is about reboundering. And as we step through that process of reboundering, RSP came to us and said, so what is it that you would like? Do you want us to continue the configuration that you currently have, or would you like K-5? And so we thought it was really important that we step back and say, okay, that's a really great question. Let's talk about like, why is it that we did that? What's the research behind that? And then how does that particular configuration support our strategic plan, right? Like, and does it, and do we need to make changes or move things forward? So that is really the context for our conversation tonight. And just kind of that idea, that boundary, where is this conversation leading us? And so this really is an outline that is going to take us to the October 10th meeting. So it's really just the first phase of many conversations as they relate to boundaries, right? And that tonight we're going to talk about the history and the research of those grade level centers. We'll be back at the September 11th board meeting to discuss what those guiding principles and boundary criteria, that information process is, follow up on some questions. We'll bring back again at the next L&T meeting. At that meeting, we'll come back with a recommendation for configuration. The 25th, that business services, we'll have that opportunity to discuss again. And then on the 10th, you're going to establish guiding principles and boundary criteria. But before you'll be able to do that, you'll need to take action on grade level configuration. So we'll bring those things forward. So, as we begin, I just want to provide some context to some of those decisions that led to those grade level centers as we move forward. And so when we look at the Davis-Richmond, this began with the 2011-2012 school year. And they really, that was the year they moved from being partner or K-5 buildings to what I would call partnership school. And the reason that they did that is they were really addressing declining enrollment at Richmond. So they were seeing a significant decline in enrollment. And that decline in enrollment was related to No Child Left Behind. And what was required at that time, something called adequate yearly progress. You had to make so much progress each year with the hopes of being proficient by 2014. If you had 2 consecutive years in a row, one of the things you needed to do was open up the boundaries to parents had a choice to attend other schools within the district. So that was the essence of why that was done. The reason that really helped get to us to the goal was that the partnership really allowed us to address those enrollment issues without impacting other district boundaries. There had been some recent changes with the opening of Bell Graham, and so just putting all those pieces in place that allowed us to do that. It also allowed us to support the balancing of demographics across schools, so that our schools would kind of mirror our district demographics. They really worked hard to create this idea of one school across 2 locations. And they worked to be very intentional as they did this. And they did this in multiple ways. They started really by being very purposeful and intention, that's the word. In terms of how do we invite families in? How do we make them feel as if they belong? How do we reach families that maybe aren't coming? They went and they created a singular PTO that kind of guides both of those schools so that families had that constant kind of the same piece are coming back. And they really reached out to say, we want to say we value some diversity. And we value those multi-language pieces. And so one of the ways that they did that was by having Davis School really focus in on literacy. And Richmond, they really turned into kind of a magnet school, or that was the intent behind it, by extending the school day, by bringing foreign language in as a possibility so that all kids were learning another language together. They also provided more reading intervention, as well as made sure kids had additional access to technology at that time. So all of those things were how they were kind of working together, but they really were very purposeful in making sure that they created a system and a community that was one and not two. And you can hear that even today when you're in those buildings. You can hear that purposeful conversation and that they don't see themselves as two necessarily separate buildings. Also, there was some pretty specific professional learning that was planned as well to really help focus around supporting students of poverty, because there was a higher free and reduced lunch in attendance. And then finally, the other piece that happened when they came together was like a consolidation of our dual language programs. So our dual language programs were at Richmond and I believe Anderson at the time, and they became between Davis and Richmond. Again, creating one full system for kids versus having to not have those pieces together. Well, all of that work was done to kind of build a solid foundation around 2 schools, one school, 2 locations. That work continues today. When there's constant ongoing collaboration with our principals. There are behavior expectations that are same across both those buildings. So as kids move from one to the other, those behaviors are the same. There's ongoing collaboration with the principals and their leadership teams. So again, we're talking about and servicing kids together as one. There are very intentional transition activities from 2nd to 3rd grade. There's common professional learning, particularly on those early release days. And they really provide all positions with a thought partner in regards to because we're all serving the same families. So the social workers, although each building has their own, they're servicing similar families. So they have thought partners and somebody to help them problem solve and think through some issues and concerns. Kind of knowing our context as it relates to why those decisions were made. As we know, research changes over time and it grows. So we're going to talk a little bit about what does that research say as it relates to grade level configuration. And the grade level configuration really says that the research doesn't identify one way or one grade level configuration to be more effective than another. It doesn't say it's this over that. I think it's also important to note that most of the research really revolves around middle school. And a lot of the conversation is around, should it be K5, 6, 8? Should it be K8 building? Should it be K6, 7, 8? So a lot of that research does focus around middle school. There is some, though it's limited as it relates to elementary. But generally speaking, grade level configuration alone is not a predictor of student achievement. And that the research really does say that we should step back and, while that's a piece of it, we really should more importantly focus on what's the student experience. That has a greater impact on student achievement, in particular, those instructional practices and the school climate, right? Those are things that have a greater predictor in terms of student achievement. The research also, whenever they talk about grade level configurations, they talk about the number of transitions that students will experience. And there's significant research to indicate that grade level configuration that we do see with the increased number of transitions, there is an impact on student achievement. So regardless of when that transition occurs, whether it's 5th grade, 8th grade, anytime a student transition, you can anticipate that there will be there'll be some loss of a student achievement. However, the research also says that it's limited and students typically rebound within that second year. So there is something for us to think and consider is the transitions. There is some value in that. Really, the consensus of the research comes back to that the most effective configuration is going to vary by school district, and it's really going to depend on the district's needs. What are our goals? What are our financial needs? What's our political context? And that when they dig in and they have conversations with buildings or districts that have grade level configuration, particularly at the elementary level, it is typically driven by districts an operational need that they have as it relates to enrollment or space or budget or school accreditation. And not necessarily, they're not using it as a lever to create an enhanced student achievement. They're really using it to solve a different problem. So as we sit down and we approach, what does that look like and what does that mean? The research talks about these are the things you need to really be thinking about as you're making that decision. What does parent engagement look like? Student mentorship, transportation, facilities, are they built and are they able to support the different grade level configurations? How does that impact your neighborhood schools? So that's kind of the grade level configuration. And then you label that next to what is the student experience that we're looking for and how we want students to have. So as we kind of think about our next steps, we really want to ground ourselves in this question and really be thinking through what grade level configuration allows us to build a student learning experience that has the greatest opportunity to increase learning outcomes for our students. That's really at the heart of what we want to do. And what does that look like? And that would be us really focusing in on what's the school climate and culture, as well as what are those instructional practices that we're doing. And so we really want to think about teacher collaboration and the PLC learning cycle. We've said that's such an important lever for us. As we go into this work, how do we make sure we're continuing that work? How do we establish instructional coherence for students? How do we make sure we've got a sense of belonging and that we're honoring dignity of each student, staff, and family member, right? That's that climate and culture. How are we effectively using our district resources, both human and material, to support those high levels of learning? How are we supporting our multilingual learners? And then how are we being responsive to student needs? So what we want to make sure we do is while we're looking at our space, we're also thinking about what's that experience. And these things are going to be the most important things that we consider. However, we also need to be, what are the practical things that we also need to bring into our conversations? And we need to think through and really articulate out those specialized programs, because there are some specialized programs currently at Davis and Richmond, one of them being dual language, right? We currently have 12 classrooms for our dual language students, and that needs to continue for us in order for us to do that work. We have our access program, which really typically supports our students with autism. So we need to think about what is the best scenario for that group of students. We also need to be thinking about the context and our political context of what, I have the wrong school year, should say 24-25 school year, that we're changing the elementary day in the 24-25 school year. So we're going to a shorter day that's going to look different than where we currently are. And boundary changes will also be going into effect. So we can't think about this in isolation of all the other changes that are going on. And as my friend Mr. Buxton likes to say, is the change, the squeeze worth the juice? Did I say it right? Whatever that is. Yes, that's it. Whatever that saying is. But it's true, because there's so much happening, we need to think about how is that going to impact, and ultimately what are the pieces that kind of come together. So that is kind of our approach, or that's how we're thinking. We obviously want to answer your questions. We want to get some feedback from you in terms of what else would you like us to think about and consider to make sure that we bring back a really well thought out recommendation.
Yeah, one of the questions that I have, so the language option that's available, right? I've gotten a lot of feedback from the community, from other schools that don't have the language option, right? And the question is that a possibility to offer that again, even with if we support it with fee structure or anything else at other schools? Because again, there's a lot of interest, especially at the elementary level, because again, some of the research, right, has shown that some of the best times to learn a language are when we're young and very pliable and not so stuck in our ways of speaking, right? So that's one question I wanted to get out there. Again, somewhat related to Richmond Davis, but something that has come up a number of times to me.
Yeah, so I think I'm gonna be just. We will absolutely look into that, but as we shorten the elementary day next year, adding foreign language in is not going to be. We would have to really think hard about how we could make that happen. However, what we do know is the gold standard in offering dual language is that it's a two-way dual language system in which 50% of our students Spanish is the home language and 50% of our students English is the home language. So that would be a way for us to maybe build, and well, we are going to, that's what we know in terms of what we should be doing for multilingual learners. That would be a way to build everybody into multilingual learners
On that note,
or build their biliteracy. No, that's what I meant to say.
I don't know. We aren't really going two ways right now with Richmond Davis.
No, it's one
So,
way.
and
It's
that
currently
was-
one way.
That was one of the issues. That was one of the, and that was what, 11 years ago now? Well, 12 years, 11 or 12 years ago now. And there are people still waiting for that two-way dual language. So that was something that I'm very familiar with the situation, and that was something that was going to be rolled out, we were told, to the entire district. And grade level centers were something that were potentially going to be rolled out, and then kind of 2 years later was kind of quickly pulled back. So I am in support of dual language, and I'd like to see it happen. But I guess that this does beg the question: if we are shortening the elementary day, what does that say about dual language at that Richmond Davis Center, as well as the rest of the district?
So in that ask, right, I don't necessarily want to put a time frame and say that it, again, to go to what we're talking about, the juice worth the squeeze, right? To put additional change on the district at that time, right? But again, it is something that is been shown to be valuable out there, and again is becoming more and more important. So again, I don't want to try to, Paul, the team to shoehorn it in to try to fit it in there, but it's something that, aspirationally, if we could consider this, and even if it's fee-based, right? I know that we're shortening the day. I believe those students prior to the Empower time, right, were coming in earlier, specifically at Richmond Davis, correct? They were coming, there was additional teaching time associated to.
They had the current school day.
Right,
Richmond had
Yeah.
right. So,
Yes.
so sorry, let me rephrase. My point is they had a different day than the day that we're reverting to, correct?
Correct.
So the point being, if we do that offering, I'm not saying it's within the same constraints that we're now sitting, right? I'm saying it would be within whatever they were operating at prior to. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
It would have to be before or after school.
Absolutely. But I'm talking about it as an option, either we support it with fees or other things, so that it's not, so we can remain somewhat budget neutral.
So since we're talking about we're talking about FLUS, right? So are there other specialized programs at Richmond Davis other than Access, Dual Language, FLUS?
No, that's all of them.
Okay.
I'm not missing. No, I don't think so. Okay.
So there, at some point, I think it would help to have a conversation or a presentation on the different ways people can get to be multilingual. Because right now we just have dual language one way. And I'm hearing that there's interest in dual language two way and learning a foreign language. And I think those are three very different programs. And my guess would be that dual language two way does not mean you necessarily have to have a longer day, because the language is taught in the classroom.
And students would leave with biliterate in English and Spanish.
Yes.
All students.
And there is a number of years to get to that.
Yes, you would have to start in kindergarten and roll up.
And if that is, I would say it would add more to the work that has to be done. But if that is something that the community would be interested in, and we're in the process of looking at facilities, is that a possibility that we should be looking at? My my guess would be it wouldn't be something that every building could absolutely do, but maybe it
We
would
have to
be
have
a
that.
magnet school
Yes.
that families would
Opt into.
invest in.
Mhm.
So that might be something that you could add to part of our how, because my concerns have been what happens to the dual language program that is at Davis and at Richmond if we were to go back to a K-5. What does that look like? And is that what we want for our kids? Is that the kind of program we want for our kids? Just as we've looked at, I think I'm saying this right, if just as we've looked at Compass and we really unpacked that, I feel like we should be unpacking.
Yeah, and that is our plan as when we bring that recommendation back. It will be in consideration of that dual language program and what are the recommendations based upon that. Like, how do we build this configuration in a way that supports dual language?
I would just echo the dual language two-way. I think it's a very interesting concept. I liked the example or the response that you gave, that would be a way to integrate the learning of foreign language by English learners in addition to the other ways. So I think it's very interesting and innovative for our district.
And I think the research has been really strong that people want their kids to be biliterate, and dual language two-way is the strongest way to get there. But it really does mean a commitment over time from at least 5 to 7 years.
Yes, I mean, we would need to provide that option all the way through middle school.
I mean,
for students.
the other consideration, right, you brought up is the facilities, right? And again, when we start to look at it and study it, when we talk about the personnel costs associated with it as well, and transportation, families are going to look at that and say, okay, they're going to make a mental weighing, right, of whether or not they want to take advantage of this, depending on where the district chooses to offer it, right? And so that's why, again, like I appreciate the question and the point, right? But it's something that I think as a board, we have that responsibility as Paul and the team to come back with what does that mean? Because again, we're offering it in this set of buildings right now, right? And when we talk about equity with, well, there's a language option.
But it's not dual.
But it's not dual language.
It's not
plus.
two-way dual language.
Okay.
Right.
So
So you would, which is another possibility.
Right.
But you're talking about one possibility, and then there's dual language two-way, and then there's dual language one-way. We've got multiple things.
Okay. But even that, right? Like it is something that, you know, has been brought up of this is something that these two schools, right? This one school, two buildings takes advantage, it is able to take advantage of, that the rest of the district does not necessarily get to take advantage of.
So
Right.
I think
So it's an equity issue across our buildings.
so just, I want to make sure, I don't know that I said this very clearly, but originally when that was put in place, it was offered to everybody in the district, and we had very few families take us up on it. But it was offered to everybody. And I think over time, it just kind of, if people would wanted to go, they would do it through the interdistrict. Yeah, policy.
You know why there was limited interest?
I don't know that.
I do.
Well, there you go.
No, there was a lot of upheaval at the time, and frankly, at the time, what was seen by a lot of the district was that we were combining two schools. There was a low performing school with a high performing school, and people were not sure what the outcome was going to be. That was the conversation I had with a number of people outside the neighborhood. I was in the Davis neighborhood at the time. But what I had heard was people didn't want to take that chance to send their kid to a school where they were unsure kind of really what that mix was. You had some other.
The way that I recall, because I was part of those meetings where we invited families from all over the district if they were interested, was they didn't want to leave their neighborhood school, which I think is what you're talking about, is that how can we get it at our school? I bought my house, I live in the neighborhood, I want to stay with my kids, which is going to be the big conversation with boundaries as well.
100%, right? And when we talk about boundaries, we have to expect that the community is going to come back to us about some of these things between the buildings, right? Especially with the voluntary transfer process in schools. And I think we're doing the district is doing a good job of reducing the spread in score outcomes between our various buildings, right? But again, it's just another one of those things that they're going to come back. And again, I think we owe them to come and do the research and say, listen, we hear you. It's something that we've heard you want. Here's how we can offer it that's fiscally responsible, or how we can offer it at the neighborhood schools. And it costs this. And then people might go, I don't want it that bad. Right. I mean, that is a very real outcome that we should expect. But again, I think we owe the community to do our homework on that.
So we'll have that for you as well. Any other requests from the board as we come back at our next L&T meeting for this conversation?
I have a couple.
Okay.
So if we were to say, okay, we're good with the Richmond Davis configuration as it is now, does that mean we have to do all schools? Does it? Why? So we're setting principles here of how we're going to look at things. So are we? Is it this board's intention that whatever we do with any building is what we would do with all buildings? And that's that equity question I think that Mr. Lentz was asking as well. But I would like to have this board think about that, or you come back.
Yeah. We'll come back with a recommendation on that topic, but absolutely the board will engage in that. So again, at the next meeting, we'll have recommendations, but we won't bring anything for action until that October 10th board meeting. So there'll still be a healthy conversation at a committee meeting prior to us bringing the final recommendation to the board. But that would be part of that recommendation conversation we would be having around the actual configurations, what it would mean across the district, and the consistency of FLES and other programming. Also ensuring that we're meeting the needs of our English learners as well. That we have a really important responsibility to ensure that we're doing right by our English learners as well. And that will be a part of that conversation.
On that note, that was one of the things I'd like to see is a comparison of the students that are the English language learners in that school. The Davis Richmond School, compared to the similar demographic across the rest of the district.
Okay.
And then my ask I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just want to see clarity. The comparison of the EL students, if we kept the boundaries the same. Is that what you're asking? Because I wouldn't have new boundaries to look at.
Well, right now I'm talking about current performance.
Current performance. Okay, that's what I needed.
So that we know how are they currently performing in that setup as opposed to the rest of the district. No,
I'll ask for a clarification there as well, Mr. McNally. Are you looking for a comparison between ELL students across the district with the students at Davis and Richmond in the dual language program?
Well, any of the EL students and how they're performing generally academically, because really we're not just simply talking about what their ability to learn a language, but their ability to perform academically across the board.
But and you mean all EL kids?
Yeah.
I think
Okay, so if I can go ahead, thank you. So my ask would be with the recommendation that consideration is mapped out specifically for how access will be handled, whether it'll maintain as is, depending on the recommendation, or how it will change. Dual language, and I think that's probably twofold. How it exists today, is it all concentrated at Richmond Davis? Do we have other components in other schools? I think that needs to be articulated, and again, what the go forward would be with the recommendation. And then I would like to see a starting thought process on a dual language program two-way, and how we might do that.
Perfect.
Thank you.
The other kind of question I have is, if we were to go back to K5, two buildings, K5, do we have the room? Do we have, is the facilities, can they handle it? You know, what does that look like? And then I'd also be interested in, with starting next year, what makes it, the way Richmond Davis was, it has been put together, made Richmond different than the other buildings. If we go next year and it's K2, 3-5, is there any difference between what the 3-5 looks like to any other building that's K5?
Oh,
What would make Richmond unique?
Beyond.
Right? Am I saying it
Yep.
in a way? I'm interested in, I've lost track. Once we made the elementary school day longer, now we're going to make it shorter. Is Richmond going to go back to its longer day, or is it, no, it's moving to the same? So what impact does that have? And
Okay.
so why would we continue? The question I guess I'm asking is, why would we continue K2, 3-5 with, when before 3-5 had a uniqueness to it?
Yep, I hear your question.
So the other, I would, and I'm just not sure what the numbers are. I know we had for a number of years, and I think the issue persists of Davis, because it's a larger building, is certainly feeding in more students than, so Davis is going to be at a lower level of capacity than Richmond typically. For years that was the case. I don't know if it's still exactly the case, because I know we brought in students.
I mean, just the actual student enrollment.
Yeah.
Davis is a larger school, number of classrooms,
Right.
Significantly different
Yeah.
size than Richmond is. So that will also have bearings on our boundaries as well.
Well, right, I guess that's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about is even were we to keep that a K2, 3-5, I think boundaries still.
Boundaries.
We need to somehow address that issue. And I don't know that it's ever we'd either be underutilizing the Davis building or overutilizing the Richmond building at all times.
If anybody hasn't heard me say this before, boundaries, it will touch each school in this district. Please hear me. It will impact them differently, but the boundary process that the board is about ready to engage in will impact each of our buildings, each of our schools in different ways, but each building will be impacted through the boundaries.
Okay, I have another couple questions. Sorry, I've been
you're
thinking
good.
about this a
You're good.
lot. As you've talked about in your presentation, the hard work that went into making this two schools or two locations, one school, has been amazing and unique and very heartfelt. It's been hard work, and I commend everyone. There's a history of all the people who worked doing this. So part of me what impact will it have on the cultures of these two buildings if we were to go back to K5? And how can we be sure that the kids are, this sounds weird, but are going to be okay? If we go back to K5, that's going to be a pretty big impact on the way teachers have been working and the way kids see themselves and the way the parents have felt as a community. And I think that if you look at the history of over a decade, that these neighborhoods have really come together as a community. So what is the impact of us going back to K5? And is it, I don't know if it's the juice, but is it worth it?
Well, I
And
think it needs to be thought of in relationship to all those other pieces. I'm gonna hold my thought.
I'm just
No,
gonna.
I appreciate the
That's kind
question.
of what we were talking about. So I was talking about the potential for redrawing boundaries and that impacting even a K2, 3 through 5. That there's going to be a change there as well. Everybody's going to be impacted. And so I think that no matter what, there are going to be changes there. And if there are changes, I think that again, if they bring greater equity to the district as a whole, maybe that's a better thing. If we decide K through 2, 3 through 5, what we want to do throughout the district.
The other thing that I'd ask as well, right? So if we give RSP, say we want to minimize busing, we want to, really enforce the neighborhood school concept, we want to do a number of things. To me, the two buildings together, there's a different cost structure there, right? Both from a, building I think no matter what, we have two building administrations, right, today. But from a how much of the district footprint each of those buildings can support, as well as what that looks like for us from a transportation cost, as well as just, general management of those facilities. So that's where, when we look for that recommendation, I believe cost needs to be a factor as well for the community about maintaining that. And similar to how we're looking at all the programs, I don't know if it's feasible necessarily to do what we're talking about, kind of that, the per program, that one metric, but certainly something for us to look at there.
I want to build on that a little bit. There was in your opening conversation, kind of the timeline, there was a discussion about the consolidation of the dual language program from Anderson and elsewhere into the Richmond Davis dual school environment. One of the things for us to consider here is not only the efficacy of the dual language program, but the need for Spanish speaking students and Latin students. We saw it in the Chapin Hall U Chicago report that subgroup has greater opportunity for improvement. When we think about these facilities, if we have a concentrated dual language delivery in the Richmond Davis environment, how does changing that either increase the potential for greater performance of that dual language program if it was decentralized or multi-point rather than single point? And so I think, when we talk about those costs, there's certainly some professional and staff costs associated with that are outside of the buildings in terms of both certification and ability to deliver that dual language program that I think we have to bring into the fore. And I think that the idea of saving on facilities utilization in a way that's positive could potentially offset greater investment in a more efficacious dual language program, or maybe better, a more widespread program. So I think that trade-off is something for us to think about.
I'm just going to jump in on that point as well, that if I've talked about this when we talked about the early childhood and how, going from the northwest to the southeast corner was probably not what we would call centralizing early childhood. In the same way, I think that if we have there are people that just wouldn't take their kids there because it's just too far. There are people that don't want to take their kids or send their kids to one particular location, but maybe if they have multiple choices for that, that might actually increase the interest in dual language as well.
This just may be a great place to add. In our current dual language program, roughly less than 50% of the students in the program come from Davis and Richmond. So over 50% of the students come from one of the other 9 schools.
And could you, just to clarify, how many sections grade? Are there 2 sections per grade?
2 bilingual sections per grade for a total of 12.
And then there is a dual language over at Norton Creek, am I right? No.
TVE program,
Okay.
which is, it's a bilingual program, which is different than a dual language.
Okay.
Right.
I think that would really help us to have definitions and a real understanding of how language is delivered in this district, because there's how many languages are there? They're like 127 something. Really. So
Just on my comment off mic here on the multiple programs. I'm hoping that both of those programs or all of the separate language programs as well will be on our program report for business services when we're talking about costs.
They're broken down a little bit differently.
Okay.
They're broken down by the type of service that we provide. So you'll see EL service, I'm going to use the words TBI, transitional
Right.
bilingual instruction, versus TBE, which we only have one of those at Norton Creek, and then there's dual language.
Just as a reporting out thing, and I
Yeah.
apologize for taking that. Can we do some parentheses and say these are the multiple other programs and where they're offered, or do some kind of footnote?
Oh, they're all over. Yeah.
So that we
Yes, we
have
have,
that.
actually, I have a document like that. Let me make sure that you have a copy of
perfect.
that.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Christine.
Okay. Hearing no more questions, Ms. McCabe?
all right, thank you all. And I would encourage, as you think through things, to please let Dr. Igo and Dr. Gordon know any questions you might have so they can come prepared. Thank you, Dr. Igo and Mr. Buxton, for your help with us in that area. That brings us to future agenda items, and we already saw what we've got coming in terms of this last topic, and we're going to read.
Yeah, we got a couple of things on our agenda for next time, and we'll revisit this topic. We're going to bring forward the student achievement report, not in its entirety, but like we did last year. Here's how we're going to lay it out. This is just to make sure we're on the right track, as well as bring forward kind of that charge statement as it relates to that high school course evaluation process, to make sure we're on the right track there.
So another short meeting.
Oh, for sure. We'll be done by 6.
We had the shortest board meeting before the L&T meeting. All right, is there anything else from the board? All right, then thank you all, and we are adjourned at 7:47.